Hi ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hive inspection number 2. Unfortunately the audio for this one was far too quiet, so I'm recording this on my microphone as we go. You'll have to bear with me. I'm performing this inspection, second inspection, about a month after I got these bees. I got the bees on the 18th of November, so getting towards late November, which is late spring for us. And I've inspected the bees once, which was approximately 2 weeks after I first got them. So this hive inspection is towards Christmas, just before Christmas. So at the moment what I'm doing is just smoking down the bees. I've still got the mesh on from the imitation flow hive that I bought. So the mesh helps me observe the bees without opening them up and having bees go everywhere, so I can do it without my suit in confidence. Don't quite have the confidence yet to work with them without a suit, but still beginning, still learning. So as per usual, the mesh frame doesn't want to come off, never wants to come off, and it's not because it's propolized around the edges like I think right here. It's because there's a giant bit of burr comb that's joining the frames to the mesh frame in the middle. There I go, figured it out. Boom, trying to pull it off. No, that's not where it's sealed. Come on. There we go. And that's the bit we got to get up. There's the bees. So as you can see, the black frames in the middle are the plastic frames that came with the nucleus hive that I bought. Population in them has grown quite a bit since I first got the nuke hive. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice at least. Putting on the frame holder. Those frame holders are exceptionally useful if you want to pull a frame out of your box and not have to set it on the ground. I think it cost me all of $10, and it's a hell of a useful tool. So I'm still getting the knack of cracking frames. At the moment I'm just trying to create a bit of space so that when I crack this frame I can pull it back. And I haven't really propolized it that much, so I'm just using the other end of the tool to pull it out. Here we go. So first frame, really, and working with gloves is not helpful. Not a lot of drawn out. They've hardly drawn out the comb at all. In fact, I doubt they've barely touched it. So moving on to the next frame. Once I get the knack of cracking frames without killing bees, I will be much happier. As you can see, I'm still hesitant and nervous in my handling, and they're starting to draw out the second frame. Apologies for pulling the frames out of sight every so often. I'm just bringing them up to eye level to have a look at them without bending over too much. Okay, frame number 3. So this is the frame that they've made the most progress on. Quite happy with the amount they've drawn out there. I was hoping that they will have drawn out some of the other frames a bit more, but all is going well there. They've drawn it out about halfway, and they've started to pack the frame with pollen and a bit of nectar. And there's a lot of bees on that frame working it, pulling it out all the way, so very happy. More smoke, get the bees down a little bit. So this is frame number 4, which is one of the first original nuke frames. So it's about 60% brood, and the rest is resources, pollen and nectar. Although mostly pollen, not a lot of nectar. A little bit of a lot more brood and a little bit of drone brood on the other side. Only 3 or 4 drone caps, nothing much. And lots of larvae. Or some larvae, which means the queen is still active, which is a good sign. So most of the larvae are situated around the existing brood, so that probably would have been spaces where resources were packed into previously, and they've been cleaned out and the queen has laid back into those when she was looking for some more room. Moving on to frame number 5, I believe. Frame number 5 here is the second frame of the nucleus hive. Again, we would expect lots of brood. We've got lots of old patchy brood still just hatching out, and I believe lots of larvae. The cells are being cleaned out and replaced with new larvae. There's some pollen resources around the outside as well. Again, very, very little nectar. This season has been horrible for nectar. And still haven't seen the queen, although I'm yet to get my eye in. Most of what I look at is what's in the cells, and I forget to have a look at what's hanging around the outsides and things, so I'm not really paying much attention to where the queen is. Most of what I'm trying to establish is that she's in there and she's laying because there are eggs and larvae. So that is a nice frame of brood. Some of them, as you can see, have started hatching, so not long. About 90%, 80 to 90%. And pollen. So much pollen this season and very, very little nectar. And that one is pretty much solid brood as well, that side. So it looks as though whatever resources my bees are pulling in, they are putting it all into brood production. So they're using the pollen to create the little bee feed for the bee larvae, and they mix that with the nectar, and it turns into a lovely little gelatinous soup that they then feed to the bee larvae. The main issue that we have here is that we have very, very little nectar coming in, so lots of pollen getting stored and very little liquid, wet resources observed in the hive thus far. And here I am being ultra delicate, trying not to hurt every single little bee because I'm a big softie. There we go. That's the way. Eventually I'll get the hang of it. It doesn't help that my smoker is broken down and I can't get the bees back down into their box. Here we go. Solid brood pattern on that one. Very solid brood pattern. As far as nukes go, I was exceptionally happy with how this nuke turned out. The number of bees and brood in the nuke originally was fantastic, but the frames weren't really old and nasty. A lot of nuke sellers like to use their old nasty comb for selling in their nucleus hives, palm it off to someone else and save them having to deal with it. So I was really happy with the quality of the comb that came with this nuke box. As you can see, they've pretty much drawn that one out. That was not quite drawn all the way out when last I looked in the box. And this is about the only frame other than the first one where I saw any nectar, and it was just a bit, maybe a palm-sized patch of nectar. And on this side we have lots of larvae, lots and lots of larvae, apparently, according to what I'm saying in the very quiet video that I recorded. Okay, so on to the second to last frame. And the bees have just started working on this one. Nothing much happening here. They've just started on the starter strips. See, originally I stapled in some starter strips, and they've now appropriately anchored those. Did a pretty dodgy job on them, but didn't want to spend a whole lot on starter strips. They're surprisingly expensive, and they've hardly started on this next frame. So what I've decided here is that I'm really going to have to feed them, because they're just not drawing out as much comb as I thought they would have. We're about a month into the process, and I was hoping to have at least a couple of frames drawn out. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic, or maybe I'm putting too much pressure on my bees, but I just thought that they would be a little bit further along, particularly given the time of year. It's just gone late spring, early summer. There's a lot of flowers around, but they just don't have any nectar in them. The winter that we had, the dry winter that we had, has led to some wiggy things going on with our plants, and beekeepers across the state are all struggling. So what everyone is doing is feeding. Now I made the decision that I didn't need to feed pollen or anything like that, because I have plenty of stored pollen and I'm watching the bees bring in a lot of pollen. But what I don't have is stored nectar, so I've decided to feed sugar syrup. In this case, the bees need it, and so I'm going to give it to them. And so my next video will probably be on what I do in terms of making and feeding sugar syrup. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching, ladies and gents. I'll see you in the next video.